Next up, we have Isaiah Likely, the tight end out of Coastal Carolina. And, I didn't know much about Likely until the Combine, which ironically is probably when many people soured on Likely. He didn't have the best day in terms of the, measurables and testing results, right? In terms of some of the agility tests or, his bench press tests, things of that nature weren't necessarily the most impressive. But ironically, the Combine is when he kind of flashed on my radar. He wasn't a guy that I knew really anything about earlier in the process. And then as I was watching the field drills, I kept on kind of notating, like, oh, who is that guy? Who is that guy? Who is that guy? And then, by the time the day was done, I decided I wanted to add him to my list of prospects to watch. And in that regard, after putting on the tape, I was not disappointed. As you'll see, I'm probably higher on Likely than the vast majority of people at this point. For a couple reasons. I think there's certainly some flaws in his game per se, but I think that there's some things that many of them are coachable and things that he could fix, right? So first and foremost, I had route running as one of my quote-unquote negatives. Not even that it was necessarily a negative, because I think he can run just about any route on the field, but there wasn't a ton of nuance in it, right? He was kind of overly predictable in his patterns. I didn't think he was always the most crisp in terms of his cuts, and he just really wasn't even engaging in that chess game, right? If you listen to some of my previous videos, whether it was receiver, tight end, wherever, you'll hear me talk about making defensive backs think you're running something that you're not, right? So if you're running a curl, you want to, in the lead up to that curl, make them think it's just about any route besides the curl, right? You want to sell that vertical route, just by example, so hard that they almost have to turn and run and start working backwards to defend this streak, and then you quickly snap it off and run the curl. If it's a post you're running, make them think it's a corner, with your feet. If it's an in, make you look like an out, etc., right? Just do different things, whether it's your eye manipulation, your body manipulation, in terms of your footwork, maybe perhaps your tempo, for example. You could alter and adjust a lot of different things to get the wheels turning in the wrong direction for some of these defensive players. And in that regard, Likely just didn't really do a lot of that. It was, coach dialed up a drag, I'm gonna, run a drag, right? And it wasn't overly exciting. It wasn't always the most effective. It didn't seem like he was always able to generate a ton of separation, and I think that's why. Because, if by your third step it's already apparent to everybody on the field and everybody at home watching what your route is that you're running, it's probably not going to always be the most effective in terms of getting open. On the flip side, one of the biggest positives that I gave him most certainly was his ability to run block. I gave him a 13.5 out of 15. Now, this was a rather unconventional grade, because generally when I say run block for a tight end, you're picturing the George Kittle, line up right next to the tackle and generate movement at the line of scrimmage. Likely was fine there, but where I thought he shined, absolutely shined, was his ability to block in the open field. This man was a heat-seeking missile. If you lined him up detached from the ball, maybe off the line of scrimmage, maybe in the slot, for example, and you wanted him to go work into the box onto a linebacker, let's say, right? Or, go chip this safety off the top. Oh, man, Isaiah Likely would go and make these guys look absolutely childish, right? He would get great hand placement, just, absolutely torque these guys downfield and kind of throw them around. There are plays where he's drive blocking guys 12, 15 yards downfield, and is the reason that some of these plays that were maybe supposed to be a 7-8 yard gain become a 17-yard gain, right? Just for example, right? Like he did a great job peeling guys off and out of the formation, just with that ability to take good angles in terms of getting to his blocks, and then from there being able to absolutely motor guys out of the formation. Maybe that's just not something they expect, right? Because, they see this guy lined up in the slot and they think like, oh, he might stalk block me, he might do this, that, and the other. And then no, Likely is going to go attach to you and take you for a ride. And in that regard, I give him a 13.5. Maybe a little bit unconventional, but downfield blocking, helping extend plays, I thought was one of his best attributes. And, just a really physical, tough guy in that regard. Even on the reps where he was going up against D linemen, I wasn't necessarily unimpressed, but it was just that downfield blocking that really, really caught my eye. Otherwise, in terms of the hands, and just general consistency. I gave him a 12.5 out of 15. The main reason for that was, one of my notes was, he was occasionally late to flash his hands and would let the ball get a little bit too deep into his frame, to where he wasn't able to do anything with some of them, right? He'd get his hands up late, and maybe it was a catchable ball. Next thing you know, it's on the ground, right? Like, there were just some of those plays, or ones that maybe he would have to bobble or double catch, for example. Not the biggest issue. Like I said, 12.5 out of 15. A generally good grade, but there were just a couple times every now and then where the ball could sneak up on him, it felt like, and could just clean that up a little bit. In terms of the rack ability, which was, for me, another one of his highest graded categories. I thought you saw that physicality that you saw as that open field run blocker. I thought you saw it here. I thought you saw some athleticism here. He was a pretty agile guy. They would run some bubble screens for him at times, and maybe that's just because, it's Coastal Carolina, right? And maybe in that regard, I'm getting fooled with the athleticism in terms of, he really is the guy that, had a bad 3-cone time at the combine, or a bad shuttle time at the combine. Maybe he really is that guy, but because, I'm watching him against Troy, for example, opposed to Alabama or Georgia, maybe I'm perceiving some things that are rather pedestrian as strengths. I'm not entirely sure, but for me, at least from my perspective, I thought he was very, very impactful and very capable after the catch. I didn't think necessarily that his ability to haul in contested catches was there. I gave him a 5 out of 10, which was kind of ironic because that was one of the reasons I did like him at the combine. He had a massive vertical, 36 inches, but you saw it in the drills. He was doing a great job high pointing balls. I didn't see that quite as much on film as I would have liked. And again, with those defensive backs kind of draped all over him, and linebackers draped over him, with that questionable route running, it felt like he had maybe more contested catch opportunities than most, and he just wasn't able to make the most of them at times. So maybe that's a grade that I'm a little bit harsher on because of the route running, if that makes sense. I try not to double penalize guys for the same things, but it felt like he just had more opportunities, and it felt like, proportionally, he wasn't able to make the most of them, if that makes sense. Otherwise, I gave him an 8.5 out of 10 on strength and physicality. Again, I thought that was one of his best attributes. I gave him a 6.75 on balance and body control, because I do think he can climb the ladder. He can, lay out and make some nice grabs, but I thought that I didn't think that it was necessarily great. And I thought the balance, sometimes he could get a little bit overzealous as as that run blocker. When you did ask him to block in the trenches, occasionally at times you could see him get dumped a little bit. Maybe that goes back to, say, his bench press number at the combine. He only did 15 reps, which, I say only because that's still, that's a fine number, but you'd probably like to see a little bit more strength in that regard. Maybe those two kind of go hand in hand, right? I don't know. I just thought that all in all, a solid prospect, an interesting prospect. Maybe not a guy that goes in round 2 tonight, but a guy that I do think can contribute to your team in an interesting variety of areas. I think he's a guy that if you can get the ball in his hands, he can be rather dangerous. I think he's a guy that if you're trying to get the ball in the hands of others, he can be rather dangerous, and that's something that I like to see, right? One of the random guys. There's really no correlation here, but say Chris Olave, right? His blocking and his willingness to go throw and lay down a block for his teammates, I thought that was a pretty substantial negative. He wasn't willing to do it at all, and to me, it's like you kind of got to be that selfless teammate. Maybe you're not going to get 10 targets a game, so go help make the guy who is getting the targets, help him make the most of his reps. And I thought there was that sort of selflessness to Likely's game that, like I said, whereas it was a negative with others, I thought for him it was that much more of an overwhelming positive, because it didn't seem like he really cared if he was getting the ball. He was willing to go out there and make the most of the reps regardless. And, again, maybe that was because the competition he was playing. He was able to kind of bully some guys at times, but at least to me, I thought a lot of it would translate to the next level as long as, like I said, you use him in the correct fashion. You don't try and pigeonhole him into a role that doesn't suit him, right? I talked about how maybe he's not the most nuanced route runner, so maybe don't day one ask him to run the most intricate routes, right? Maybe dial some stuff up for him, whether it's play action, and he can kind of not get a running start, but like you can kind of confuse and influence the defense in a particular way. Just free up some looks for him, I guess is what I'm saying. Kind of like Coastal Carolina was with the bubble screens. I don't know if that's necessarily what you want to do with Likely, but something to that effect, right? Just get the ball in his hands and let him work. And when it's not in his hands, let him work as well. All in all, like I said, I have a second round grade on him. Don't know if he's going to go that high, but regardless, if he goes in round 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think whoever gets him is getting a solid prospect and somebody that can really contribute to your team in a variety of areas. Like I said, the run blocking was one of the highest grades I've given anybody in that category over the last 2 years. And even though it's a little unconventional, I think it is certainly something that could be a benefit to your team. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this video, if you thought it was a benefit to your knowledge about Isaiah Likely, I know nothing too crazy, just more of a general discussion about what I thought he did or didn't do on film. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I know most of you are probably here because your team drafted him. In that regard, I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are. Did your team draft him to be an every down starting tight end, or is he more of a rotational guy? Which I think right away that could be a good place for him. Maybe while you help nurture some of that route running and things of that nature behind the scenes, you give him a limited snap count, right? Pair him in a platoon with another capable guy and help him gain experience in that fashion. Maybe in that regard you wouldn't want to take him in the second round, maybe closer to the third or fourth, but either way I think regardless, from my perspective, you'll get a guy that has the potential to be pretty productive for your team. So with that being said, that's all I have for you guys in this one. I'm mic'd up, now I'm mic'ing out. Peace, guys. See you next time.